Welcome, everyone, to today's podcast. My name is Jeremy McLaren. I run marketing here at Qualsys, and we're really excited to have everyone on. Literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that have registered for this, and as you all get sitting down and getting logged in and testing your audio and making sure everything works, we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping before we dive in. This is part 3 of our 3-part webinar series on Qualsys hybrid solutions. We want your participation. The very first question you probably are asking yourself is this going to be recorded so I can refer to it later? And the answer is absolutely yes. We actually have a YouTube page. If you haven't been there before, it's qualsys.com/YouTube. Sorry, reverse that. youtube.com/Qualsys. We'd love for you to subscribe to that. And we've got a whole playlist there called webinar recordings. And all of our previous webinars, including part 1 and part 2 of this webinar series, are located there for you to be able to watch again, share it with friends, share it with colleagues, etc. So we would really hope that you subscribe to that channel, and then allow you to be able to get access to not only the webinar recordings, but all the other great video content that Qualsys marketing and Qualsys technical teams produce. We also want to make sure that you have a way of participating in today's webinar. So if you will direct your attention to the GoToWebinar control panel you used to log in today, there should be a section called Chat or Questions. We've got several of our technical account managers on the line today answering your questions. Nate Anderson, Mark Bateman, Jason Horton, and others. And as you guys are, asking your questions, they will be responding to them right away for you, so you can get your answers right away as we're talking. If there are questions that are relevant to the conversation, we may bring them up as part of the presentation today. But we do have a lot of information to cover, so we want to make sure that we get all your questions answered in real time, and then also make sure that they're addressed as part of the presentation today. We'll be making introductions of our two guests, of our two presenters today. But before we do that, I'd like to do a little bit of a poll. And the first question I want to ask is, are you currently a Qualsys dealer? There's 2 choices here. You can go with yes or not yet. The reason we ask this question is we want to understand who we're talking to. If you're not yet a Qualsys dealer and maybe you're looking to understand what we're doing for an evaluation, decide whether or not it fits what your business model, fits what you're doing, fits how you like to, install or support your customers, then, we want to understand that so we can talk a little bit differently to you and make sure that things that might be obvious or old hat for an existing Qualsys dealer are then introduced to you in a way that you can say, okay, I understand that too. We don't want to just speak directly to the people that are existing customers, but of course we also want to make sure that those who are existing customers, that we're not spending too much time on things you already know. So we appreciate all your participation in that poll. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. Before I do, just know that if you had trouble clicking on the poll, no big deal. We totally understand. Sometimes I've heard that if you resize your window, that it could give you a little bit better view and allow you to access that poll. It might also be the browser you're using or the version of GoToWebinar you're using, but no big deal if you can't get that poll. The next question we have is, what are you currently using for your hybrid installs? And we'd like you to choose all the ones that apply here. Are you using Qualsys? Are you using DSC? Maybe you're using a Honeywell or Resideo product for hybrid installs. Maybe you're using a DMP product or something else. Choose all the ones that apply to you so that we can get kind of an idea of where you're at today, what you're doing today, and we're going to talk here in just a moment about how we define hybrid and lead that off as we go into things. And it looks like, there's a big percentage you're using Qualsys. So, for those of you that are currently Qualsys customers and those of you that are using Qualsys for hybrid installs, I just want to personally say thank you very much. It's your feedback, your ideas, your usage that really make this company great. And Kevin will talk about this throughout the presentation, I'm sure, but voice of the customer is really important to us. As you guys use our products, as you use our services, and you have feedback for us, we do our best to implement that feedback in a way that actually makes the experience better for you. And I think most, if not, many of our security related or smart home related or wireless or settings related features that have come out via software update have been from feedback from the field, feedback from people like you who are out there installing the product, using it in various scenarios and saying, hey, this was great, but what about this? Hey, that was great, but what about, this other scenario? How can I cover it? How can I take care of it? How can I still use it in this particular situation. So again, we really appreciate the business that you've given us. And then the last and final poll question I have for you is, which security wireless do you use? Specifically because today's conversation is about wireless as part of the hybrid solution. We want to understand, are you using DSC's PowerG? Are you using 319.5 interlogic sensors? Are you using 433 DSC sensors? Are you using 345 megahertz, the 2 gig or Honeywell frequency? Are you using the Qualtis S-Line encrypted 319.5 sensor? So understanding which sensor lines you're using will help us, again, craft the conversation in a way that will make sense for you, that will help us present more effectively. And again, this is a choose all of the above. So, if you're using dual SRF, which we're going to talk about today, maybe you're using PowerG and the Qualtis S-Line encrypted 319.5, you might check both of those boxes. Maybe you're going into homes that already have an existing 2 gig system in them and replacing that old 2 gig GC2 with the IQ panel and taking over all the existing sensors in the house, and then also adding in maybe a few new PowerG sensors to that upstairs window you couldn't reach before, or that detached garage, or things like that. And as people ask questions about this and use this technology, we're going to be talking about that in today's presentation today. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll, and we'll do our introduction. Again, thank you for taking the time to fill out those polls. My name is Jeremy McLaren. As I mentioned, I'm the Senior Director of Marketing. We're going to turn the time over to Kevin Woodworth, our Senior Director of Technical Account Management. And he's got a special guest here, Mark Buckley, our Technical Trainer for Strategic Accounts for Johnson Controls. First off, Kevin, thank you for hosting this and preparing this presentation. I'm excited to hear what you have to say. I think the people on the line are excited to hear what you have to say. Why did you choose Mark Buckley to be your guest on this particular webinar?
You're putting me on the spot, Jeremy.
I did.
Oh yeah,
I did.
Mark is JCI is a key partner for Qualtis, and Mark is the best of the best. He's extremely knowledgeable, especially when it comes to PowerG. He's a strategic, account manager for the West Coast on the technical side, and I've learned a lot from Mark about PowerG and some of the features and benefits and functionality of specific devices, and so I wanted him on the call today, and he politely obliged. So happy to have you, Mark.
Yep, and Mark really is a great expert in the field, especially from all things technical, but PowerG especially. When I have a question about PowerG technology, the first person I call is Mark. Mark, you've now been selling, not only Johnson Controls and PowerG for many years now, but you've also been talking a lot about Qualtis. What do you love most about Qualtis, and why did you agree to be on this webinar today?
I absolutely love the fact that you guys move so rapidly in development. This dual SRF concept, especially when utilizing the PowerG along with a legacy frequency. There are so many features about the Gen 2 Plus product that is just phenomenal in my opinion. And it just excites me as a technical guy to have a product that I can really dive into, and then just seeing the synergies between these two companies now has been great.
No, I appreciate that, Mark. And you'll notice that despite all of Mark's technical prowess, he was not able to get his camera working. So shame on you, Mark. But I'm sure it's related to something on your laptop permissions and not you personally. So today's webinar is the third, like I mentioned, the third in a three-part series about our hybrid solution. And a hybrid solution, as a reminder, is a combination of wireless, the IQ panel, and hardwire. And our first webinar in the series, which is available on that YouTube page I referenced earlier today, was talking a lot about our hardwire solution, the Hardwire 16 Fire, in both the small enclosure and large enclosure. And we also talked about the new upcoming PowerG hardwire translator, which is very exciting. In last week's webinar, we talked about the IQ panel, and there was a lot of really powerful features that you can leverage in this hybrid type scenario that set it apart from all other hybrid scenarios out there. And then today, of course, we're going to talk about wireless. Before I turn the time over to Kevin, I do want to take a moment just to say there are a couple webinars that if you are not participating in them yet, have not subscribed, not subscribed, but if you've not actually gone in and registered for them yet, that's the word I'm looking for, then I'd like you to do so. It's a long link, so I apologize for that. But there are two webinars coming up that are alarm.com webinars. I'm putting them in the chat right now. Click on those and get subscribed for those. One of them is actually taking place tomorrow, so many of you might already be subscribed for it. It's essentially going to be with our own technical account manager, Mark Bateman, and the Alarm.com team talking about professionally guided installations with Qualsys, essentially doing a self-install for the customer and doing it with them. So guiding it from a professional level. So that should be a lot of fun and very interesting. The other one, and it might not be as relevant to the technical crowd, but perhaps share it with the people in your organization that are, I will be helping host a webinar with Alarm.com about maximizing your digital brand. And we'll be talking a lot about websites, about social, and about brand awareness and content creation. And that will be taking place on the 27th. So we encourage you to register for both of those. Kevin, let's get back to the subject and dive right in. Hybrid, what does that mean to you? And you know, how is wireless an important part of the solution?
Yeah, well, look, I think you said it. You know, we consider a hybrid panel 3 pieces. You have the main panel component, you have a hardwire component, and a wireless component. And we spent a lot of time over the past 2 weeks talking about the panel and the hardwire component. So we're very excited today to talk about the wireless component. Couple things that, as you probably know, if you've attended the past webinars, the Qualsys panel is pretty powerful on the wireless side. We have 3 different choices, or what I call 3 different flavors of panels. Sometimes from a marketing perspective, or it's easy to reference the box color. So we might say the silver box, the red box, or the gold box. But essentially what you end up with is a panel that has PowerG built into every single version. So you see that here on the screen. You see that all of the Qualsys panels, the IQ Panel 2 Pluses, come with PowerG standard. And so we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about PowerG, but they also have legacy support, right? So they can support 345 megahertz in the silver box, which is that 2 gig Honeywell we've been talking about. They can support 433 megahertz, which is the legacy DSC protocol, as well as 319 megahertz, which would encompass, you know, ITI, Interlogix, GE Security, as well as Qualsys and Qualsys S-Line. On top of that, as a reminder, again, from the hardwire section, the gold box version, or the 319 version, also supports our hardwire 16 module. And then coming soon is our new PowerG hardwire module, which we're all very excited about. And of course, aside from all the great PowerG benefits, which you'll learn about today, you know, we're excited that it actually works across all 3 flavors of panels. And so that's going to make for a very robust solution. Now, you may not know it, but this ability to do 2 wireless frequencies in every single one of those flavors of panels, PowerG is a standard, and then one of the legacy protocols is something that we call dual SRF. And SRF is a term we use for security radio frequency. So we can support up to 2 different security radio frequencies. And again, that's PowerG standard, and then pick your legacy flavor, either 319, 345, or 433. But for today's webinar, we want to spend most of our time focusing on PowerG. It's really nice to be able to take over the legacy devices, especially with, you know, having millions and millions of devices that have been installed worldwide over the last, you know, 10, 20, even 30 years in some cases on the wireless side. But we really want to focus on the new stuff and PowerG in particular. And so that's what the bulk of our conversation is going to be about today. So we have to ask ourselves, what is PowerG? And I'm gonna transition to Mark here and let him take it away on this.
Excellent, Kevin. Thank you. So PowerG as a wireless protocol, it's bidirectional. So when you see the frame there, communication 2-way, not only for remote access, but for control and for programming and for messaging and for passing encryption. So there's a lot of reasons why the bidirectional is so important. Range is what everyone is concerned with. You know, how can I get an outbuilding, a detached garage, a shed, a multi-partition scenario? And so range versus legacy wireless is also very important. Of course, because of the bidirectional communication, we then gain extra battery life. So battery really is determined by distance and how a particular sensor has to transmit. And typically in the one-way world, you transmit at 100% of what the FCC allows, and off you go, and the battery has maybe a 2 or 3 year life. In this case, we can actually adjust the amount of battery needed to send that signal to the panel. And of course, encryption. And so it is 2020. We hear a lot out in the market about all different types of hacks, whether it's Wi-Fi or otherwise, computer, etc. And in this case, everything is 128-bit AES encryption. And so we're going to have some examples of how we utilize this PowerG in the field. So Kevin, if you'd like to advance there. Okay, so in speaking of the bidirectional and that two-way communication, and this slide was put together by Jeremy some time back, and I thought it was great because we need a visual indication of really what's going on. And when you think of something like me speaking right now on this webinar presentation, well, if I was in a huge auditorium and standing on the stage, way back in the back, you're not going to hear anything unless I speak louder. And I may not be allowed to do that depending on my transmission protocol and how much power can be generated by the device. But in this case, as the sensors get farther away, the signaling, the bidirectional, will send back, and the panel will say, oh, you need to increase or send a stronger signal because you're further away. Where the ones that are closer, they'll use less battery because now that passing or handing off of information says that you're right on top of me, I'm perfectly fine using 10% of my battery. It's a great graphical depiction of that feature that we mentioned before, battery adaptive power. The next slide, we'll talk a little bit about range and the use of encryption. So now one of our projects that goes back many years was using PowerG on the USS Midway. This is docked in San Diego. It has been turned into a museum, so people will visit this ship. And of course, they decided to protect the deck and a few layers above the tower, all with PowerG wireless. So this is a harsh environment, and it's also a concern with a lot of military-grade communication information that may be still in play, not as if it were an active ship out in the sea, but at least from our perspective, having encryption, having range, and having the ability to communicate bidirectionally all was really the strong set of reasoning behind why PowerG was put here on the ship. So we love to show this. It's a good, a harsh environment for all of you that are familiar with how boats are built and how large they are and how thick the steel deck. And we know that signal has to bounce around before it gets back to the transceiver host. So a great application for the technology and why all of those PowerG features that we mentioned a few slides ago are so important. So, Kevin, if you'd like to show how Qualsys handles learning the PowerG into the panel, I think it's all yours.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And, one of the things I'll just add here on PowerG, I think, I'm looking at the poll here. We had a pretty large percentage of our participants today are using PowerG actively or have installed PowerG in the past. And this really is one of those times where if you've done it, you kind of know, you'll get this, you understand. I like to say that the PowerG just works. It's just a really good protocol. In fact, I'm wearing my Got Range PowerG t-shirt today for this webinar. So we're just, at Qualsys, we're really big fans of PowerG. It's been a great partnership with JCI and bringing this technology to the forefront. So it just really is kind of the best in class, and it just works. Now, on that subject, it does work a little bit differently than you might be used to. And so today, being a technical webinar, we wanted to get into the tactical side of this. how you learn it in, some best practices. We're going to go through and talk about some specific sensors, some of the capabilities out there, and make sure you're aware of everything you can do with PowerG. And so that's kind of where we're going to transition here in the webinar, is to the actual technical side of how you do this and some of the best practices. So I kind of think of this in 3 separate steps. Step 1 is pairing. That's the act of physically getting the sensor ID into the panel. If you're familiar with sensor IDs on other protocols, sometimes they're 6 digits alphanumeric, sometimes they're just numeric 7 digits. In the PowerG world, we actually use a 7-digit serial number on the device itself. And so we have to get that into the panel. You can either do that by manually learning it in or auto learning it in. And we're going to kind of go through these in detail here. Step 2 is association, or sometimes we call it networking. And this is where the panel or the device actually shares its encryption key with the panel and makes sure that it begins working correctly. And then step 3 is actually the range test, or what we call the placement test. So you got to learn the device in, it's got to network itself with the panel, and then we want to make sure it's going to work from the installed location via the placement test. And so we're going to kind of go through these specifically here. So step 1, the biggest thing you should know about PowerG is that it learns in differently than a legacy sensor. With a legacy one-way sensor that's not encrypted, typically it's just an open close, or maybe in some cases it's a tamper of the case, and that's going to go ahead and transmit its 7-digit sensor ID to the panel for the panel to auto learn it in. Or you can manually just type in the serial number onto the panel and it'll just start working. In the PowerG world, it's a little bit different, and this is changing over time. But rather than just simply opening and closing or tampering the device, the vast majority of the devices are going to actually have an enroll button on them. So you see here in the diagram, I've called out number H there. We've got number I, which is the tamper spring, right? You've got the read switch for the open close, and H there is the actual enroll button. Now this is an actual diagram of one of the sensors. This is the PG9945, it's the full-size sensor. And so this actual enroll button is what needs to be pressed in order for this device to learn into the panel. And this is one of the more common questions we get. Guys that are used to working with legacy sensors, they put the panel in auto learn, and they're sitting there struggling trying to learn in a PowerG sensor, and it's because they don't know about this enroll button. So on the older style, I shouldn't say older, but on some of the original PowerG sensors, they have this enroll button. On some of the newer PowerG sensors that have come out more recently, we're making this process a bit easier, and we either activate via pull tab, by battery pull tab, in some cases via a tamper, or by inserting the battery. But the point is that you're going to have a little bit different process here. Now, if it has an enroll button, step 3 here is key. You have to press and hold this button for 3 seconds. And there's going to be a little yellow LED, or a little LED that lights up amber or yellow when you press and hold that for 3 seconds, and then you're going to release. Sometimes we have people just press the button and let go, and that's not going to work. Sometimes they press and hold for a long time, 5, 6, 7, 10 seconds. That's not going to work. So you want to make sure that you put the panel in auto learn, you press and hold the enroll button for 3 seconds, the LED will light up yellow, and then you let go. That'll automatically transmit the enroll ID or the sensor ID to the panel. The panel will pick it up, and you can finish hitting configure, and finish configuration and hitting save on the panel. So once you know that, this is a very easy process. If you don't know that, it can be a little confusing at first because you're trying to learn it in the old school way, but this is a bidirectional new school sensor. The second thing that's going to happen, and this should happen automatically, this just happens in the background, is association or networking. At the time that you auto enroll this device and you press and hold that EOL learn button on the device itself, or that learn button, sorry, on the device itself, it's going to automatically share its encryption key with the panel. Remember, these are 128-bit encrypted devices, and so it has to pass that encryption key and kind of associate or network itself with the panel. Again, this should all happen automatically, even though I have this called out as step 2, because I want you to understand that that's happening. This is a step that happens automatically in the background. If for some reason that hasn't happened in the background, or it hasn't networked itself, then you can force it to kind of re-network itself or reshare its encryption key. either by tampering and restoring the tamper, then performing an open close, either by pressing and holding that enroll button again for 3 seconds and letting go, or by doing a power cycle, kind of one of those 3 different ways. And again, normally this happens automatically, especially if you're using auto learn at the panel. But if you're manually typing in a sensor ID into the panel, the 7 digits, then you have to do this. You have to either tamper, restore, or open close, press the enroll button, power cycle in order to get it to share its encryption key. Or if you remotely learned in a sensor from alarm.com, right? So remotely learning in a 7-digit serial number from alarm.com is kind of the same thing from the panel perspective as manually typing in the serial number. So I took a call yesterday from a guy who had done a panel swap. He was taking out an old panel, putting in a new panel. He did a backup and restore from alarm.com. Alarm.com sent down all the sensor IDs, all the sensor names. Everything was programmed at the panel, but the sensors were looking for the old panel, not looking for the new panel. And so all he had to do was go around and perform this re-network or reassociation process at each sensor, and then they automatically started working at the panel. So association or network is kind of a key step that's unique to PowerG. And then the third thing is placement test. And Mark, I'm going to let you talk about placement test here from the sensor side.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kevin. And if you could go back one slide, I'd like to add a little bit about the serial number conversation. So there's a 3-digit number. We're going to talk in more detail about that first 3 digits of the 7-digit number and how it identifies a sensor and what type of sensor you have, where the last part is the unique identifier, the 4 digits. So you may be thinking, 4 digits, just like a 4-digit user code in a panel. There's only 10,000 variants. Well, the reality is this is a short number for ease of either keying in or displaying on a screen. There's actually a much longer string of a serial number and, of course, a lot of data that happens in the background with the 128-bit encryption. So don't get too worried about the fact that it's only 4 unique numbers there, because there's a lot more going on in the background as well. So once the sensor has been learned in, and if you would like to proceed to that next slide, we have an on-device placement test. Now, this will work for all sensors that you learn in, and once you've auto-enrolled, you can walk test this detector in the field. So if I learned in a door window and I start walking away from the panel about every 20 to 25 yards, I open, I'll get a flash of the red LED followed by 3 flashes of a different color. And what you're hoping for in all cases is 3 greens. So red followed by 3 green. You continue walking, you open it again, red followed by 3 green, and this actually stays active for 15 minutes. And so if I just take a sensor, walk it out, and I want to put it at a door, when I get to the door, I'm still flashing green. I set it down, I go back and grab my next sensor, take it to where it's going to go, and I can walk test all of my devices. Now, there is a way, and Kevin will share the capability in a moment of how we can test sensors at the actual panel, but this helps especially if you have more than one person install, where you're learning in the sensors and the other technicians taking them out and walk testing. There's a few little nuances here. You may walk a little too far, open the sensor, and get 3 of those amber, yellow, orange flashes back. You can turn around, face the panel, walk maybe 1 foot away, open it again, and now all of a sudden it's 3 green. What's happening is it's relinking as that distance increases. And so a lot of those tech tips that we offer are, once it changes color, maybe take a step or 2 back, see if you can get 3 greens again, and then continue walking. If you get 3 yellow and you just can't get it to go back to 3 green, you have 2 options there. You can leave it as is. That's still a good signal. It's just not an excellent signal. Or you could consider deploying a repeater. And then, of course, if you get to 3 red flashes and that's all you get, you're really, really far away from the panel, that is when we highly recommend you drop in a repeater at that point in time. And we'll talk a little bit more about the repeater coming up. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, and Mark, so one thing also that I'll add to that and help us understand here is as I'm walking out or walking this to its final location, I'm opening and closing, every 20 yards or so, whatever it is, and it's kind of automatically adjusting. Sometimes that takes a minute or a couple opens, closes to adjust to that as I go, like you were saying. But one other thing I can do if I'm having trouble or if I don't feel like it's adjusting quite like I think it might, I can re-tamper that device, right, from the installed location, and that automatically readjusts and ups its transmit power. Is that correct?
Correct. Once it's tampered, and any sensor that has a problem communicating to the panel, if it doesn't get information back, so there's another benefit of the bidirectional wireless. I try to transmit, I don't hear anything back. I instantly go up to 100% transmission power, and so now it's searching and it wants to find that transceiver. And so anytime you tamper a sensor, you're replicating that same action, and you're also giving yourself another 15 minutes, so that a lot of dealers will learn one sensor and walk test with that sensor the whole job site, with knowing that as they learn in the other 40 sensors, I've already walk test the whole facility, and with this one sensor in my hand, determine that we have no dead spots, everything's coming back excellent. Then they learn the other 39 devices and just go out and install them. So a lot of little tech tricks, you'll figure those out as you start working with this technology more.
Perfect. I've got a little animation here of that flashes. Let's see here. So the other thing you can do is you can range test this from the sensor, right? So Mark talked about the LED on the device itself, which is really nice for a local placement test as you're walking around with the device. The other thing you can do after you've got your devices placed is you can actually come back to the panel, and we've designed a specific PowerG sensor test. This is different than the legacy sensor test that's on the panel. It's on its own bucket under Advanced Settings System Tests. You'll have a PowerG test button, and you can actually see a bunch of information about the PowerG sensors on here. Now, for the most part, you'll get a list of all your devices as shown on the screen here, and you can simply hit run, and the panel will actually use the bidirectional protocol in PowerG to go ping the sensor and ask for its signal strength, and then it will return a result. Now, that result is strong, good, or poor. It's actually color-coded, green, yellow, red, to match the LED on the device. So it's a very simple test from that perspective. And you can simply hit run, and you'll get a lot of information about that device and its signal strength. You can also hit more and get some additional information, whether or not it's going through a repeater, the last time that was updated, things like that. You can even test the LED. If you see here, there's a little button that says test LED, and you can, if you didn't know which sensor was which, you can actually flash the LED on the sensor. So if you had 10 door windows laying out on a table or somewhere, and you wanted to flash that LED, you can manually flash that LED from the sensor test. Now, there is a couple exceptions here for sensors that cannot be tested from the panel itself, and that really boils down to two different sensors. One is the older vanishing door window sensor, what we call the 9975. That one can't be queried from the panel. You have to use the onboard sensor test with the LED. And the second one is the other thin sensor, the 9309. So, or 9303. Did I get that right, Mark? 9303, right?
9303, you got it.
Yeah, thank you. I always get confused there. But the 9303 is the thin sensor. So that sensor, you want to use the onboard placement test with the LED on the device itself. You won't be able to query the device from the panel itself. Now, if you placement test it locally from the device, it will show up on the panel. You just can't run or query the actual sensor remotely through the bidirectional protocol. So two great ways to do your sensor testing. Now, one of my favorite parts about PowerG is just physically the lineup itself. There is a huge amount of devices available to you, really for just about any application you can run into. And aside from the protocol and all the benefits, the range, the bidirectional, the encryption, the frequency hopping, all that kind of stuff, this to me is one of the most powerful parts of PowerG. is all the different options that you have to choose from. I'll give you an example I like to use. On this screen here, you'll see 10 different motion detectors. In a traditional world, you might have 1 or 2 motions to choose from, right? Like in the Qualys S-Line protocol, we have a single motion detector. It's a great 40-pound pet immune kind of residential motion detector, good all-around detector. But when you get into different types of environments, larger sites, smaller sites, commercial sites, non-climate controlled sites, outdoor, indoor, you really need to have different options available to you. And that's what PowerG allows here. So on the motion side, you can see, we're going to go through all these here in a little bit, but you can see that you really have a robust lineup, right? You've got an 85-pound pet immune, kind of indoor residential motion detector. You've got a mirror optic. You've got a dual tech, a microwave, and a PAR. You've got a ceiling mount, a long-range ceiling mount. You have a curtain, an indoor curtain, an outdoor curtain. You've got an indoor with a camera, an outdoor with a camera. So just lots and lots of different options, right? I also really, really like the smoke detectors, which we'll talk about some unique features there. And I like at the bottom of the screen here on the right-hand side, the indoor siren, the outdoor siren, and the repeater. And this really gives you some unique ability to go tackle some challenging problems in specific environments. So it's one of my favorite parts of PowerG. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend some time kind of going through each of these devices. We're going to make sure you're aware that they exist, what they are used for, and any best tips, tricks, or practices. Before I go through some PowerG devices, we're going to talk about keypads real quick. And I wanted to make sure you knew we had an IQ remote keypad. I'm sure most of you do. Now, this is a touchscreen-based keypad. To be clear, this does not work on PowerG. This is a Wi-Fi based keypad, right, or a Wi-Fi based touchscreen. And you can pair up to 3 of these in a home. Comes with a wall mount, table mount. It does chimes, voices, security, lights, locks, thermostats, panel camera, all kinds of different features and functions here. But this is a Wi-Fi based panel, and so because it's Wi-Fi based, you want to make sure it's connected to the same 2.4 or 5 gigahertz network as the main panel. You want to make sure it's running the same software as the main panel. That kind of all happens automatically. And you need to be a little bit careful about how long your power run is, right? We ship this with a 7-volt transformer now. And so, that'll get you only a certain distance depending on what gauge of wire you're using. So really great product, but we want to make sure that it's sold correctly for its target audience. It's Wi-Fi based, and it kind of hits a very specific use case. If you're looking for something different, transitioning now to PowerG, we do have a PowerG keypad. And this is a basic PowerG keypad, right? It's obviously not a touch screen here. But, and so I kind of think of these two products as you kind of have both, right? You've got your touchscreen kind of Wi-Fi based tablet, which is does all the fun, fluffy stuff. And then you've got kind of your hardcore security keypad that's super robust, on PowerG, always gonna work, not dependent on Wi-Fi, right? Gives you arm, disarm, sensor status, chimes, emergency buttons, kind of for that really robust security application. And so this really gives you choice in your offering and what you're choosing to offer your customers. Now, it can run on battery only or on DC power. I like it a lot better when it runs on DC power. I think it works a little bit better when it's constantly powered. It doesn't have to sleep and try to conserve battery, things like that. So when I install these, I always recommend ordering the DC power supply for this. It is a separate SKU. You want to make sure that you order that separate because it doesn't come with this exact SKU. And Mark talked a little bit about the device prefix, how every device has a unique 3-digit prefix. And the really cool thing about that is that when you learn this into the IQ panel, the panel is going to know exactly what device that is. So not only is it going to know it's a motion detector, for example, it's going to know exactly which motion detector it is. It's going to know it's a 9914 and that, XYZ can be configured and not ABC. So it's a really smart way to do the protocol, and it just makes it really robust and smooth. A couple best practices on this keypad in and of itself. Like I said, I like it when it's on constant DC power versus just battery only. It does have a backplate damper. from time to time, I see that get overflexed by over-tightening the screws. That'll pull the tamper away from the keypad a little bit, and you might get a false tamper there, so watch for that. And then the backlight is controllable from the actual panel programming itself. When you learn it in, you can control whether or not you want the backlight to be on all the time or to time out and turn off. And Mark, I'm going to pass this one to you here. Yeah.
Sure. So for some of you on the call, you may have gone back to the early days of PowerG. We had a vanishing contact called a PG9975. That sensor is still available. It's just not a normal part in our inventory anymore. It was somewhat replaced by this 9303. And when I say somewhat, the profile did have to change once the battery was changed. So this one has a larger, thicker battery, which then creates a thicker case. But it's still a small, discrete design, a longer life battery, used typically windows and places where you have narrow returns. Traditional sensors, which we'll talk about coming up, have other features, where this one really is just an open close. So you have a reed switch built on board, no wiring terminals, nothing else. It does have a visual signal indicator. So as we talked about that walk test using the sensor, you will have an LED flashing through on almost every single sensor we have. So in this case, because of the white casing, you'll see the LED flash through the case, where if this were a brown sensor, there'd actually be a little notch in the middle of the sensor where a clear lens would allow that visual signal quality to come through. So of course, you're going to see the visible signal quality and one of the best practices on these sensors repeated time and time again. And so we're not going to audibly share that with you every time. You will see that on the screen, and you can always review the recording of this presentation in the future as well. And you want to take this one, or you want me to, Kevin? Back forth?
Yeah, I'll take this one. I'll let you take the next one. So the 9945 is what I call the full size sensor. This is going to be kind of maybe your best range sensor, but most importantly, this has an auxiliary input on it, right? This one's going to learn in with the enroll button, so it's not a battery pull tab or insert the battery. You can have that little enroll button I showed you that you hold for 3 seconds. Of course, it has the visual indicator. You can get it in white or brown, and the device prefix is 101. Now, one of the other unique things about this device is that that aux input can be configured on the panel. It can be configured normally closed, normally open, or even for an end-of-line resistor. And this device is actually UL 985 rated as a short-range fire transmitter. So this is UL listed to be hooked up to a hardwired heat detector. So sometimes you don't want a full photoelectric smoke heat combo. You just want a simple hardwire or a heat detector. This is a great option for that, and it's rated for that. There's a sensor that looks very similar, Mark. So what's the difference, Mark, between the 9945 and the 9309? Because they look the same on the outside, right?
Exactly, and they'll have the same profile. Things start to change by the device prefix, and you'll notice a change on the circuitry and the battery itself and some of the intelligence. So early on, this little story time, if you can imagine the traditional home where your door opens 20 times, or maybe you've got 5 kids like Jeremy and it opens 200 times a day, but no matter what, we usually have a limited number of activations besides the typical supervision. But now think of your Home Depot and your Lowe's type commercial environments where a door opens 10 times as often, so 2,000 times per day. Well, an 8-year battery life, as the last slide showed, 96 months, 1/10 of that then would be 9 months, 9.6. And that's, again, in ideal scenario, that up to 8 years. So we found that 6, 7, 8 months later, we were killing batteries on the 9945. So the engineers went back to the drawing board and made some modifications, and now you have a commercial rated contact that will give you up to 5 years with that 1 to 2,000 activations per day. And so there's a few extra things that they did while they had the opportunity to redesign multiple auxiliary inputs. But as you notice in the best practices, currently only one of those two inputs is supported. So future enhancements are always thought of by the PowerG engineers as they develop these. But it's a great product. It's not necessary, as we all know. We don't need to put this on a residential front door, even if you've got 200 activations a day. Batteries don't give you, you're not going to get 15 years because you're only opening it 200 times. Batteries do diminish over time naturally. So don't spend the extra money unless you need the product for that application. And again, as Kevin was mentioning earlier, there's a reason why there are 10 different motion detectors, and in this case, 4 to 5 different door window contacts, because they're very application specific. Buy what you need, use what's appropriate for the application.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Mark. And that's a good segue here to the recess sensor. So, obviously great sensor when you need to be discreet, or when aesthetics are a challenge for those certain customers, really nice front doors, etc. This one learns in by either inserting the battery, or if the battery's already been inserted, then you can simply tamper it to learn it in. This one has a 10-year battery life with typical use. It comes in a white casing or a transparent casing, depending on the color of the door. Sometimes transparent looks a little bit better if you got a unique door. It's a pretty standard 3/4 inch drill size, 2.5, 3 inch deep hole. And the device prefix, that unique 3-digit prefix ID, is 108. One other neat trick about the sensor is you see the little wings on the sensor itself. Those are actually designed to break away. They're robust enough that if you need to use them to hold the sensor in, they're there and you can. But if you want to snap them off, you can snap them off and have a little bit cleaner install. So really nice recess sensor here.
And I really like how Kevin mentioned the difference there in how to learn in the recess contact. So in that case, it was a application of the battery. When we first started with the 9303, it was a pull tab for the battery. The 9945, one of the older sensors, it was an enroll button. And of course, the 9309, which looked just like the 9945, had a pull tab. So we also enhanced that sensor to make it easier for you to learn in, applying power instead of having to use an enroll button. So you'll notice that over the product line as we continue going through all of these options and best practices. It's a great thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind is, hey, okay, on this device, I just need to apply power, which applying power is often just pulling a battery tab out. Moving into then another enhancement was an outdoor contact. So, of course, what's the best way to protect the gate? Well, we could have taken 9945 and put it in a NEMA little box enclosure and hardwired out to a contact and tampered the cover and tampered the back of the NEMA box, and we'd have a lot of different ways to handle an outdoor application years ago. But we decided to build a contact with an IP rating. So you have an IP 66 housing for this one, just like you might on an outdoor camera. You do have an auxiliary input if you wanted to connect some sort of contact to it. Very wide operating range temperature-wise, -40 to +151. Now, UL will restrict that down to -31. So you're going to lose 9 degrees if you have a UL installation, by the way. And we do find the additional data. This is an opportunity for me to talk about that little white piece of paper that's often folded up in little squares and wrapped around the product when it's put in the box. And it's called an installation manual. And you often will find a lot more details on specifications and mounting tips and tricks. more than we're going to be able to have time to share with you today. So,
yeah, perfect.
yeah.
Thanks, Mark.
Sure.
So we're going to move away from the door window contacts. So we're going to start talking about motion detectors. And again, this is really where I end up talking to a lot of customers, a lot of security dealers who are designing for a very specific use case. Maybe it's an outdoor lot at a car dealership. Maybe it's a non-climate controlled warehouse. Maybe it's a large showroom floor in a retail environment. Maybe it's a 7-Eleven or even a residential home. And so this is where the PowerG really shines, is the different types of motion detectors for the different applications. This is one of my favorites. This is what I would call kind of your your day-to-day PowerG motion detector. It's very aesthetically pleasing, looks really good in a residential environment, especially. It's 85-pound pet immune. This one does have the enroll button learning, so press and hold for 3 seconds. Of course, it has the visible indicator. Gets great battery life. It has a front and a back tamper, so very secure. And it comes with a couple different mounting brackets, either a flat mount or a corner mount. Device, that 3-digit device prefix is 126. Now, you want to make sure it's in range, of course, which we talked about. But the wall bracket on this is reverse of what you might think. So from a best practice perspective, you click it on the wall bracket and then it snaps upward instead of snapping down. It locks in very securely, though. That's why we say mount the wall bracket first and then click upward to install it. And it also has a removable pet mask. So if you take the front off of this motion detector, you'll notice a little pet mask in the device, a little plastic mask, and you can actually remove that. So if you want a little bit more look down, if they don't have a pet and you're looking for a little additional sensitivity, you can just simply pull that pet mask out. So really great motion. If you've ever used it before, looks nice, easy to mount, easy to enroll. Good stuff.
So moving over to the next level of motion detection. So of course, the 9914 was an evolution of our original 9904. So you may find those quote unquote New Mexican alien eyeballs out there in the field. That's what we used to call them. And it's been replaced by the 9914. But when you think about traditional residential usage or office environments for commercial space and approximately a 39-foot coverage area, now when we move into the next detector here, the 74, it's a mirrored optic detector with a larger coverage area. Many of you might be aware of the old Aerotech days of hardwire mirrored optic detectors, taking that PIR element, and instead of finger coverage, you can think about all those little beam patterns that you see in the installation manual. It takes those beams and reverses them and shines them back into the detector and hits a mirror, and the mirror then creates a curtain coverage. So think about the mounting height of the detector down to the floor as a solid curtain instead of the finger coverage. So that's really where mirror optic gives you that excellent ability to capture movement across its field of view. Now, one of the best practices there is be careful removing the set screw cover. So at the top of this detector, there's a small little lid that lifts up so you can get to the screw. The screw does stay locked into the detector, but that's probably the hardest part of figuring out how to open this, because the natural inclination is to go to the bottom of a detector and start to pry and twist and poke and do all the things that make it look pretty bad. So keep in mind that it's at the top of this detector and not at the bottom. Now, if we move on, and I'll continue with this one because it looks exactly the same as the 9974. If I had these in my hand, the way I would tell the difference is using that prefix number. So of course, if I have a 74 in my hand, it's going to start with a 123 in the serial number. If I have an 84, it's a 150. So if I'm looking at the serial number or the part number, I'll tell the difference. Looking at the detector from the front, I won't know. And so it's important to understand, one being a mirrored optic, where this 84 is a dual technology in the wireless package. So you get a traditional PIR, but you now get a microwave. So you get two technologies in one detector, and you get that same range as the last product as well, a 50-foot range. Now, in the Qualsys platform, they take advantage of something that had been built into the PowerG technology years ago. And so if there's anyone on the call who has installed this maybe on a Neo panel, one of the options you didn't have was to take advantage of the anti-masking built into the detector. The Gen 2 Plus panel, IQ panel Plus, sorry, Jeremy, I'm always saying that incorrect.
IQ panel 2 Plus.
IQ panel 2 Plus, IQ panel 2 Plus. There we go, locked it in the brain. So the anti-masking is supported as a motion event and transmitted. So that is very important and something that I wanted everyone to be aware of. Kevin?
Now, Mark, I was gonna ask you what's an example of an installation environment where the dual tech motion might make sense? Is it a warehouse that's not climate controlled, or is it something else specifically? Where have you seen this used, or where might you recommend this type of motion over a single technology?
So even back when I was doing hardwire installations with dual technology, first and foremost, we're always worried about false alarms. So we're trying to reduce false alarms. The more technologies you build into a detector, when you require an alarm to have both, that means you're more likely to have a true event. So a spider walking across a lens looks very large for almost any PIR, and in this case, maybe even the microwave may trip. But it's less likely when you have a small rodent going across a warehouse floor that they're going to activate both technologies simultaneously. So I would say harsh environments, areas where you still have to be concerned with temperature. There's going to be a maximum installation temperature for these as well. But in those warehouses and areas where airflow and insects and rodents become prevalent, I would consider the 84 over a traditional motion. And we do have other motions we're going to be showing, and there aren't pet immunity built in to some of these upcoming detectors that I think, Kevin, you're going to jump right into, ceiling mount. So when pet immunity is needed, for sure.
So this is the 9862. This is a ceiling mount motion detector. It's 360 degrees. The key here with this device is that this will cover about 30 feet. You see there on the screen, 10 meters, 32.8 feet. It has a 5-year battery life. You know, certain retail applications or certain applications where you want a motion on the ceiling, this is a really great option. You don't always have to have that motion, you know, in the corner or on a wall somewhere, or maybe if it's on a wall, it has an obstructed view. So this really allows you to get a much better field of view in certain installation environments. Of course, you want to make sure it's in range, and you want to make sure this isn't mounted to a ceiling that's taller than about 13 feet. That's about the highest that you want this device to be mounted. And we do make a similar motion detector. It's the 72. So instead of 9862, you have 9872. This is what we call the long range 360 ceiling mount. The difference here is the mounting height and the coverage area. So this goes all the way out to 65 feet. You got the link indicators, the visual indicators, and all that good stuff. It's, you know, pull tab enrollment. So no learn button on this one. Device prefix 128, and this has a much higher mounting height. So instead of 13 feet, this will go up to almost 20 feet here. We're showing 19.7 on the screen, or 6 meters. I don't know if you want to add anything on these two, Mark, but really kind of unique to have a wireless. We see these a lot in hardwire, but to have a wireless 360 ceiling mount motion is pretty unique. And then to have it in 2 flavors that really allows you to design for the space. Really good stuff here.
And just to add a little technical tip here, back, if anyone has used ceiling mount motions previously and the limiting height sometimes can be overcome by maybe a piece of conduit with a 4-square box. And so if you had a 25-foot ceiling, you could drop down to 20 and mount the sensor on that 4-square box. In the hardwire world, no problem. In the wireless world, the concern is that metal, you've now just removed a little bit of your wireless capability by mounting this detector directly on a 4-square metal box, maybe even with a plate. So just be very careful with applications and utilize the range testing that is available at the detector and at the panel, and you'll make that determination. If you just hold it up in the air on a ladder and then you install it, that's where you may create that problem at that installation time. So maybe hold it behind some metal when you're out in that warehouse. Curtain motion. So this, by the way, probably was my favorite motion when it first came out. Installing hardwire detectors in corridors. Often you would mount the detector above a door jamb or try to put it in the corner, and you'd have those quote-unquote fingers of coverage going down this 3 to 4 foot wide corridor. Somewhere down, you could walk between the two offices and never activate that detector because you'd only be breaking one beam, not two. And so a lot of adjustments were required up and down a ladder, and you still might not be able to get it to work. Here we have a motion that's designed for those applications. If you mounted this above a door, you now have a selectable coverage. And of course, this selectable coverage is not climbing back on a ladder. It's going directly to the panel. Or as you're learning it in, you can set that sensitivity level, which corresponds with that coverage distance. So whether the beams are going out, and in this case, beams turned into curtains again, whether they're going out to 6, 12, or 18 feet of coverage is all done at the enrollment phase. So now that same concept of someone walking between two office doors goes away. You could also put this in front of a store, huge piece of glass. Maybe you're using glass break detector, but you want a little redundant coverage. So you have a glass break and this curtain motion shooting straight across that window. Now, of course, move this concept to outdoors. And so this is a recent new product that was released, and it's an IP55, if I'm not mistaken, not an IP66. I'd have to verify that. So the IP rating system for outdoor dust and water intrusion, you often are concerned with that when installing cameras in outside environments. So in this case, this is designed for a detection range up to 25 feet, so a little farther. You can imagine a 2 to 3 bay garage opening. Maybe you would want this in the corner and going across, or maybe you have a very modern design home with a flat roof deck that's up one floor and a lot of open sliding doors. And if you're familiar with those pocket or zipper style doors, they're very hard to protect with contacts. So now we can move the protection outside of the perimeter instead of waiting for someone to break a window, which is often a great conversation to have with a customer. You know, would you like the alarm to give you some sort of notification or a siren to sound, or the police department to be called through the monitoring station before someone breaks your window or after they've already gained entry? And so that's a great conversation to have with a potential client of yours. Of course.
Yeah, and Mark, I see these being used a lot in driveway applications, right? So on a stake at a driveway, the car drives up the driveway, they get a notification, right?
Yes.
Could be a group 25, just generate a text message or an alert. They chime at the panel and alert and alarm.com. So a lot of really great use cases here for this device, right?
You got it.
Okay, perfect. Transitioning to the what we call the peer cam. So PIR cam, camera, peer cam. You'll hear us refer to that most frequently. This is an image sensor style device. It works a little bit differently depending on how it's configured. So we'll talk about how it works with Qualsys. This is a motion detector and a still camera. Now, the camera in here is QVGA. So if you know about QVGA, these aren't the highest resolution images. They're quite small packets. It allows us to transmit this over the cellular network, so Wi-Fi is not required. But this is one of those times where it's not a product that I like to oversell, but if you need a picture, sometimes a picture is certainly better than no picture to see what tripped the alarm, and this might fall into that type of category. So it's a QVGA resolution. You can pair up to 5 of these with the Qualsys panel. That's 5 total peer cams. We've got 2 here we're going to show you. This is the indoor. One of the nice things about this device is that picture actually shows up at the panel, and it's stored at the panel, and you can see it at the panel. It's also sent to alarm.com. And so to be really clear on how this works, you can do a peek-in now from the alarm.com app, and you can request a picture on demand. It'll send that picture to the panel. It's stored there. It's also sent to alarm.com. The end user can get it in their app, text message, notification, stuff like that. But this is also primarily used for what I would call visual verification, right? So during an alarm event, if the detector is tripped, what we do is we actually take 10 pictures from the detector. The panel stitches those 10 pictures together into a little video, and that video is stored locally at the panel for now. So we don't send all 10 images to alarm.com or the central station. They are stored locally, and we have them there. We create that little flipbook video there on the panel. We do send one of those images to alarm.com, and then alarm.com can send that down to the central station. So nice device if you need it. If you need an image along with your motion detection, this might be that device for you. Now, we also make it in an outdoor version, right? So the PG9944 is the outdoor version of this detector. Works the same from a picture taking functionality perspective as the indoor one. That's all the same. Again, a total limit of 5 of these devices on the panel. That's mix and match indoor, outdoor. So if you had 2 indoors and 3 outdoors, that would be your 5 total peer cams that can be paired to the panel. Mark, do you want to talk real quick about the OPTIC technology and kind of what that means on this device and how that rolls into the next device we're going to talk about?
That's a tough one to explain, but it is a proprietary trademarked innovation from the PowerG folks, and they've implemented the OPTIC technology into not only this outdoor PIR cam, but as the display is changing to our standard outdoor PIR only. So a large concern with outdoor applications is how to prevent activations by animals and other actions. Anyone on the call who does cameras understands when a camera looks at a field of view, you may have a sidewalk where you don't want to pick up bikers and hikers. You may have cars going by. You may have tree branches swinging in the wind. And so all of that, all of those concepts that we try to do in the camera world, in the technology itself, that OPTIC technology is using multiple elements and using the intelligence coming from those elements to almost create an algorithm of, am I really going to activate under these conditions? Now, having said that, even though we have the great technology, we use the black mirror optics for that immunity to false alarms. If you look at the best practice, Kevin and I discussed this yesterday, that the Group 25 on the panel is highly recommended. If you get local reporting only, and of course the data that can be pushed through alarm.com, you may prevent having a false alarm where police are dispatched. Because if it were a typical motion group that then gets transmitted to a central station, if the central station can't verify with the homeowner, that becomes a dispatch of the police. And we know how the police just love running out to false alarms on motion only. So keep that in mind.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. And we're going to speed up. Yeah, go ahead. That's great.
And I don't know if you want me to take the next two here, Kevin, because we've got both a shock and a glass coming in. So
Sure.
shock sensor. In this case, think of a door window sensor with shock capability built in. So within the device itself, it's a little taller than your average door window, so its profile is larger, but it's thinner, so it can fit on the jamb of a window or maybe a door, glass storefront door. So you could activate both technologies. So you could have the reed switch active, so it's a door contact with the impact or the shock, and it is an adjustable, programmable threshold. And so in the panel programming, there's the capability of selecting door window M. And the M, is it multi, Kevin? Is that the term that you're using?
That's right. Yeah, multifunction. Yep.
Multifunction. And that way, if you're going to utilize the reed switch and the shock simultaneously, you would want to make sure it's programmed properly. Now, there is an auxiliary input. So depending on how this is positioned, maybe it could be on a fixed pane of glass. You've seen those nice large art style windows that they're building today, but they don't open. So you have the shock sensor on that frame, but maybe right next to it could be a small window or an operational window on either side. So you could use the auxiliary input to hardwire and protect those from opening and closing at the same time that you're simultaneously protecting that large picture window in the middle. Now, of course, that's on the frame impact based on sensitivity. We still have an acoustic glass break. So here, the 9922 is an acoustic sensor. So you're concerned now with mounting position. Am I on the ceiling or on walls or opposing the glass that I'm protecting? I do have a limited range. So for me, the biggest takeaway on a glass break detector that's acoustic is testing it properly. So when you tamper this device, it not only puts it in that 15-minute placement test that we talked about earlier, but now in this particular device, you actually are able to use a glass break simulator in order to generate that sound of breaking glass, and it's ignoring that impact piece that should be the beginning of how a glass break activates. Impact followed milliseconds later by sound of breaking glass. The tampering concept will allow you to use a simulator, and all types of conditions should be tested. If you've got blinds, if you've got drapes, make sure your glass break simulator is put behind those. Too many applications where you have the windows completely open, the drapes are pushed aside, the blinds are up or to the side, and you're testing it just for range. Now all of a sudden the range diminishes as soon as you put additional window coverings in place. Anything you want to add to that, Kevin?
No, I think that's perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. I do like how small it is. It's quite a bit smaller than a lot of wireless glass break detectors I've seen, and it's nice and easy to mount. So I think that's a good one for sure. We're going to move on to a couple different key fob style devices here, and we have several different ones. We have a 9939, which is kind of your standard 4-button key fob. Looks very much like what you might be used to in this industry. One of the cool things about PowerG key fobs is that they will give you visible and audible feedback for the most part on these devices, so you know if your command actually went through. Obviously, being a key fob, it's a mobile device. You want to test this from multiple locations around the site from where you're intending to use it to make sure it's in range and working. This one learns in with the star button, so pretty simple to enroll. Panel and auto learn, hold down the star button, and this one will enroll. Now, we do have a nicer looking key fob. In my opinion, I call this the Mercedes fob. It's a little bit sleeker looking. It's still a 4-button fob, pretty much the same functionality as the other 4-button fob, except for this one also has one unique feature, and that is that each button has an LED. So there's a main LED at the top of the key fob that lets you know that a transmission was sent and received, but there's also a light for every single button as well. And so that will actually give you visible feedback that that button was pressed and that the signal was acknowledged on that device. Again, this one uses a star button to enroll. We have a 2-button, Mark. If you want to take these, the next couple devices here, that'd be great.
Sure. So the 2-button is going to look similar to our single-button panic coming up next, but it still functions as an arming and disarming product as well. So when it's utilized as maybe a panic only, the advantage here is you have to press and hold both buttons to generate an alarm, as opposed to a single button, which could be accidentally pressed. So for those of you in the hardwire world, really the difference between a latching and non-latching panic can make a large difference as to understanding what's happening at a site. Why is somebody hitting that? Are they hitting it with their knee? Very hard on a hardwire to hit something with your knee and actually activate it. So in the wireless, because we can mount this where needed, it then becomes a false alarm prevention. But you could use it for arming and disarming, and then the panic would be optional for the customer to use at that time. Now, the single button panic, of course, you're only going to get the visible signal transmission indication. You're not going to get audible like on the key fobs, the 3 previous products. We want to give you indication of not only what was transmitted, but which button on the fancy one. The one button that doesn't have an LED back on that 9929 was the STAR key, which is often defaulted as the panic. Again, for obvious reasons, we don't want an audible indication that a panic button was pressed. So in this case, it's a single button. It ships with a lanyard, so it could be designed to wear around the neck. It has a plate that can be mounted. It's got 2 screw holes, so you could put it under a desk or on a wall. I've got one of these for my mom that's actually positioned approximately 20 inches off the floor in the bathroom. So if she fell in the shower, she could actually reach out. If she fell at the toilet, she could actually reach over. So it's something that I wanted easy access to, and it does have some water resistance as well, even though that we're not showing that on the specs.
All right, perfect. So yeah, we're gonna chug through this here. I know we're going a little bit long here, but we don't have a lot left, so really appreciate. Looks like just about everybody has stayed with us, so we really appreciate you guys hanging in there. We're going to talk quickly about some life safety devices, and this the smoke detector, the 9936, is our smoke heat detector. It's one of my favorite devices in the PowerG lineup. It does have a 135-degree fixed heat detector inside of it, as well as a rate of rise detector. This one, you actually insert the batteries to enroll. So don't pre-insert the batteries and then try to tamper it. If you've already got the batteries inside, pull them out for about a minute. Then you go ahead and reinsert them to auto-enroll this device into the panel. But one of the coolest features of this device is what we call the wireless interconnect, right? So if you're familiar with the hardwire system, they're typically interconnected so that when one goes off, they all go off. Well, because PowerG is bidirectional, we can do that with our smoke detectors, right? So when a single detector goes off, we can actually have them all go off. That's really great for certain applications. This actually is fully UL listed as an NFPA section, NFPA 72 section 29 compliant, fire system, life safety system. So we actually meet the UL standard for that. We have a lot of jurisdictions that are starting to use this in primary fire applications with the Qualsys panel. And again, it's all UL listed for that. You can go find all of our documentation online, or we can share it with you. So really, really robust application of a smoke detector here in PowerG with the Qualsys panel. Certainly in compared to maybe what you've been used to doing, which what I would call as supplemental fire, right? Maybe you had 1 or 2 detectors and you call it supplemental fire. In this case, you can certainly do that, but you can go beyond that and actually become a primary fire application here in a residential space. Couple key tips here. You want to press and hold the test button for 3 full cycles when you're tripping it. Of course, you can use a can of smoke as well, but if you're using that test button, press and hold it for 3 full cycles. That'll send a signal to the panel. It'll set up all the other detectors, and you're kind of off and running, good to go. There's also a fairly large sounder/LED chart in the installation manual for this. This has a little chirp, of course, like all smoke detectors, as well as an LED. And based on what that's doing, it can really mean a lot of different things, right? Whether it's low battery or dirty detector or end of life, things like that. So just keep that in mind as kind of a best practice. If you're ever having a trouble, refer to the manual, listen to the chirps, look at the LED, and you'll be good to go. Now on the CO detector side, Mark, I'll let you take that, some similarities here and some differences.
Sure. So actually the PG9936 and the 33 are redesigns from the original detectors that were released years ago. So there used to be a 9916 and 26, and there was a 9913 carbon monoxide detector as well. So one of the main changes, and besides the chambers, would be the battery life. So in this detector, we went from a 1-year 9-volt battery to a 5-year battery life. So detectors themselves only have a usable life. So in the CO detector world, 5, 7, or 10 years, depending on the product. This is a 5-year sensor with a 5-year battery. So in an ideal world, you're done with the product after 5 years. In a non-ideal scenario, you may have a battery replacement at 3 years and 7 months. But then by the time the battery would be going low again, the sensor already needs to be replaced. So having that 5-year battery will help to solve a lot of those go-backs from a product that we built years ago. Now, again, that sensor LED and sounder chart is very important on these detectors. And of course, testing of CO is a little bit hard if you want a real activation versus a test button or a sensor test press, because a real activation of carbon monoxide usually requires a test kit and time, and it changes based on elevation. So if you're working in the mountains at 6,000 or 7,000 feet versus down on the plains, it can really vary how these things get tested. So otherwise, great product that can be used in residential and in some municipalities. It will be allowed in commercial applications as well, and depending on how they're classified. So that's a longer conversation than this class can handle. So if you have questions about that, please reach out and we'll point you in the right direction. Or keep in mind the NTC folks there in Vegas who do all of the NICET certification. It's a great tool for those of you wanting to learn more about fire and life safety, just generally speaking. So
thanks, Mark. So we're gonna transition to environmental devices. We've got a couple here to talk about. The first one is the temperature sensor. We call it the PG9905. This is a really unique device because most temperature detectors that are out there, we would call a heat or a freeze. They're fixed at a certain temperature. But in this case, again, the bidirectionality, we can actually configure this temperature sensor for different thresholds. We can make it a heat only or a high temp only and only look for a high temp threshold. We can configure it on the panel to be a traditional freeze sensor and only look for a freeze threshold, but again, that threshold's adjustable. Or it can actually be a dual function device. So we can actually be looking at both the high and the low temperature sides of this device on the Qualsys panel. And those thresholds are adjustable from -40 to 185 degrees on the panel. So a really wide range of adjustability. One of the other really nice things about this device is it has an optional probe that can be attached to it. So maybe you want this in a commercial style fridge or freezer, a walk-in fridge, for example. You don't want to mount the device inside the fridge because fridges are made of metal and insulation, and that's going to significantly hinder its transmission ability. So you can have the device mounted outside the fridge. You can have the probe going inside the fridge, and we can actually remotely monitor this device for temperature changes. Now, this learns in depending on how you want it programmed, either where you're looking for both, that'd be group 51, or if you want it as a freeze, that'd be group 52, or a high temperature would be your group 53 on the panel. You can get alerts to alarm.com, so you get a text message alert if that threshold is crossed. And we're actually working with alarm.com right now. It's in beta on a new commercial package for physical temperature monitoring where not only will we do the threshold monitoring, where it's just crossing the threshold high or low, but we will actually be able to remotely show the physical temperature. So, it's currently 36 degrees in the fridge, for example, on alarm.com, and they can actually view the current temperature in addition to the actual threshold monitoring. So that's something that's coming via an alarm.com service plan in the near future. We've got the flood sensor as well. And again, this is a kind of a typical flood sensor. It enrolls with your enroll button learning. So you got to press and hold that button for 3 seconds. You're going to get a nice 8-year battery life, and it has a 6-foot probe. So typical for any flood type application, we'd recommend mounting the sensor as high as possible. That's for 2 reasons. One, you want to make sure you get great transmission range and you don't have that sensor at the floor. And 2, we want to keep it out of the water, of course. So that's the reason it comes with that 6-foot probe. Moving into some other devices, and Mark, I'll transition back to you. These are some of the more unique PowerG devices and some of the ones that I like the most. You want to talk to us about sirens, both indoor and outdoor?
Since you love those, Kevin, why don't you take the next 2 and I'll take the last.
Okay, perfect. So this is something that, from my experience in the wireless world has been a challenge. Having external sirens that are nice and loud, that get good range, has been something that's been a bit of a miss over the years, especially in the wireless space. You could always hardwire a siren, but of course that's time and money and running a wire if you even can. So I really like these 2 devices. The first one is the indoor siren, and the part number is PG9901, and more specifically PG9901 BAT. And this is a newer part number than the older part number. The older one was just 9901. The new one, 9901 BAT, actually comes with the battery ready to go with the device. So you don't have to worry about ordering that separately. And this doesn't require power. So you don't have to fish a power wire to this. You just screw it to the wall and off it goes. It works. It's got a strobe built there in the middle. It's 110 decibels. This is device prefix 400. Of course, you want to make sure it's in range like all the devices we've been talking about. But one of the other really nice things about this device is you can actually configure it to do things other than just be a siren. Now it'll follow, right, your temporal 3 for fire and your Bergs, cadences and things like that. But it can also follow your chime or your entry exit or both, your entry exit beeps. And those beeps can be configured in the panel separately from the siren volume. So the actual siren volume is going to stay the same during an alarm event, but you can actually program the chime and the entry exit beep volume to either be low, medium, or high right there in panel programming. So really nice device when somebody wants an extra siren and you don't have to hardwire it all the way back to the panel. Now, essentially, we make the exact same thing in an outdoor version. The outdoor version has a blue strobe, and the difference here also is that it's in a weatherproof housing. So it's IP55 rated. Aside from that, just about everything else is the same. The configurable chimes and alerts, things like that, the battery life, the fact that it doesn't need power. You can simply just screw to the outside of a wall and you're good to go. And lastly, Mark, we'll let you talk about the repeater here.
Sure. So signal repeater. If the range of the PowerG at 4 times what you're used to with legacy isn't good enough, we can go farther. Now think of a repeater in our world as a single hop. So we're not creating a mesh. It's more a star configuration. So if my panel was in the middle of the hallway coming in from the front door, garage entry, commercial space front door, it's on the opposing wall before you head out to the warehouse. If you need to deploy repeaters for extra range, think about going north and south and east and west and northwest and northeast. You can put up to 8 of those and you're creating a larger bubble of coverage. They do not repeat one another. So that's that non-cascading message down there. A repeater does not repeat another repeater. So effectively, we're getting double the range of what the panel can produce from the sensor directly to the panel. And in some instances, maybe even a little bit more. The sensor to the repeater may actually have better range. And again, it's based on where it's located and and the actual positioning. You can get this repeater up high, closer to 14 feet in some places where the panels has a limit of where you're going to be mounting it for usability. So a lot of concerns, but again, they can test just like any other sensor. So it can test back and give you feedback as to its range. So whenever you are in the red feedback or the poor from the panel, you want to deploy a repeater. And if you do it when you are in that yellow world, what you're primarily doing besides giving yourself extra range is extending the battery life of all the sensors that can now talk through the repeater. So think of it in two different ways, not just range, but actually assisting in battery life.
Yeah, and that's one of my favorite things about that, Mark, is, you know, adding a repeater in the PowerG world really never hurts, right? You're getting additional coverage, and if anything, you're making it so that all the transmitters, back to that original slide in the auditorium, right? They can talk much softer, they can transmit with less power, and still get back to the panel with excellent signal, because this device is always powered and running off of AC power, right? So I really love that. Kind of when in doubt, install it. You're going to pick up a bunch of additional range, and you're really going to even out the flow of battery life across your devices. Okay, guys, I really appreciate everybody hanging in there. We got a few more housekeeping things here. We're just about done. So that really is kind of the complete webinar here. We really appreciate those that have attended all three sessions, both the hardwire session, the panel session, and now the wireless session. We hope that the information today you found was valuable and interesting to you. Lots of different things out there. I've been seeing lots of questions coming in. We didn't take many questions publicly on this webinar today, as we had too much content to kind of cover in the allotted time here. But we really appreciate everybody chatting in your questions. As a reminder, Jeremy mentioned it at the beginning of the webinar, part 1 and part 2 of the series are already available to watch. So you can watch these on our YouTube channel. Also, if you got an email from us reminding you of this webinar, there were links to these in that email, so they should be really easy to find. If you didn't get a chance to watch them already, please go do that. Again, part 1 was the hardwire section. Part 2 was the panel section. Today is part 3. This was recorded, so we will also post today's webinar, part 3, in the same location. So you'll have this as a record to go back and watch throughout time, or if you have other individuals in your company who couldn't attend today. And just as a reminder, kind of what this all sums up in our world from our perspective is essentially you end up with a single platform for every solution, right? Whether it's a hybrid, whether it's wireless, whether it's hardwire, whether it's residential or commercial, SMB, where you need partitions and all the other features we talked about in the panel training. Maybe it's the builder market, aging in place and wellness, MDU and multifamily we talked a lot about in past ones, energy, and I mentioned hardwire. Really, you have a robust set of hardware and software available to you to tackle just about anything you can run into. So we're really excited to work with everybody. Again, we appreciate you attending today. One of the things we value most is your feedback, so please keep that coming. Work with your account managers and your technical account managers, and continue to engage with us, because that's what keeps us going. Really appreciate everybody's time, and Mark, Jeremy, appreciate having you both on the webinar today, and I thought it was great. So thanks so much, and we'll see everybody next time.
Thanks, Kevin. Reminder to everyone that we're going to send out an email tomorrow that will include the link to today's webinar. We'll also include the previous 2 in the 3-part series. That will be on our YouTube page later on today when we upload it, and you'll get the email tomorrow. We're also going to send out a lot of the questions that you asked. So there's been just literally hundreds of questions being asked in the chat. I want to thank Mark and Jason and Nate for answering those questions so quickly. Hopefully everyone got their questions answered. If you didn't, now's your last chance to type it in there and get that question. If you thought that maybe the answer you got wasn't quite clear enough, again, retype your question, get it in there. We want to make sure that you feel satisfied by those answers. And we're always here to support you. So reach out to marketing@qualsys.com if you want marketing support, tech support@qualsys.com if you want access to the technical support department. You can always call us at 855-4-QUALSYS, option 2 for tech support, option 1 for sales and marketing. And we've also got the dealer portal. If you don't have access to that today, make sure you get access, dealers.qualsys.com. That's a great place to find technical documentation, to find training. I'm willing to bet there's a good percentage of people on this call today, on this webinar today, who don't have access to that and have not gone through our online training. There's some great material on there. So please participate in that. You'll get your certifications afterwards. So, we're really looking forward to supporting everything you do. And we really truly believe that IQ Panel is the perfect hardwire solution. You've got hardwire, you've got wireless, multiple forms of wireless, like Kevin and Mark have been so eloquent in describing today, combined with the power of the IQ Panel that Mark and Nate shared with you last week, and how amazing the features and the differentiation that you're going to get with that provides your customers, whether they're commercial or wellness or residential or whatever. So it's been a really great honor doing this 3-part webinar series. We'd love your feedback on how we did. Please let us know, reply to the emails or put it in the chat. Let us know how we did. Let us know what you want to hear for future webinars. Remember, we've got those other webinars coming up here soon. One with Mark Bateman tomorrow on alarm.com, talking about how you can use IQ Panel in a self-install situation with your customers. And one next week with me and the marketing department of alarm.com, talking about how to build a great website and build your brand up. We're looking forward to many more webinars coming up. Please continue to attend these, and we appreciate everyone who's on today and for staying on as long as you have. Thanks very much. We'll talk to you next time.